From our earliest days, our species engaged in collective action to accomplish a number of different tasks, like hunting or gathering firewood, which were often seen as being more successful when undertaken by a coordinated group who could, say, act in mutual self-defense, or who could help someone to get on each other's shoulders to reach the higher fruit in the trees. Now, acting together, while obviously provides certain economic advantages to us, like helping to spread the fixed cost of certain kinds of activities, uh, it also enables a very important economic aspect called specialization. People will recognize specialization immediately when they think of a band. In a specialized economy, we have a drummer, a bass player, a guitarist, and a vocalist, as opposed to one person who necessarily does it all. Finding one person who can do all of these tasks is particularly challenging to do, and if every musician had to learn to play every instrument, we'd have a lot less music to enjoy. So, in general, what we try to focus on is specializing people's actions to doing, in general, what it is that they do best. Now, a lot of people have encountered this notion of specialized labor through Adam Smith or David Ricardo, the British economists who helped to formalize our modern conception of value added through specialization. But quite frankly, the idea has been around for thousands of years. The idea of dividing up labor is not a new concept, nor is it a particularly British concept. In fact, centuries before Adam Smith was ever born, the Venetian arsenal had a moving assembly line and standardized parts and specialized workers who did certain tasks. And that's still a relatively modern example. So be aware that specialization at the end of the day is one of the key factors that underlays our ability to create this kind of excess value. So I'd like to take a quick wander through the kinds of gains that we can derive by specializing our activity. For instance, let's consider a very basic example that will help make things a little simpler for us to look at. And this is considering the basic gains from specialization that can occur in terms of food production. When we're looking at, for example, trying to produce as much food as possible for our village, we divide up our workers into two types. Some seem to be more efficient hunters, and others seem to be more efficient farmers. Type A produces enough food for 4 people when they farm for a day, or 6 people if they hunt for a day. Meanwhile, type B is a better farmer, producing food for 8 while farming, and hunting produces only enough food for 3. It's not very hard to understand that if you want to create the most total amount of food, what you need to do is identify the A and B types, have the A types farm and the A types hunt and the B types farm. And this allows us to produce the greatest amount of total food. Now, this type of situation where do what you do best works even if you don't have what we call an absolute advantage. We can see by comparing the amount of food that A and B produce from the different activities that B produces more food from farming than A does. So clearly type B should farm. But what if type B was just a generally not as efficient worker and only produced food for 3 people from hunting and 2 from hunting and 3 from farming? In that case, even though A is a better farmer and a better hunter, we still have these B people in our village, and these B people should be doing what it is that they do best, which means farming. So aside from having a maximal amount of outputs, we also have to accept that there is generally what we call a utility gain, or an increase in people's degree of satisfaction when we have a variety of different goods. We're not simply trying to produce the most total food for people. We're also trying to produce varieties of different foods for people. And our modern economies work off this kind of hyper-specialization. For instance, we have people who earn their livings writing romance novels. There are even people who make their living teaching finance to other people. Now, when we think about the scale of specialization that's required in a modern economy, a lot of people often neglect just how complex these things actually are. And so I'd encourage you to take a couple of minutes and take a look at this link down below on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, which gives you an indication of the complexity required to create something as simple as a modern lead pencil. And I'm not even talking about an engineering pencil or a push pencil. We're just talking about a wood-encased piece of graphite. So have a look at that, and you'll understand the degree of complexity that's required to deliver even the most basic, or what we consider the most basic services in the modern world. And that's one of the reasons that we have the kinds of things that people from the Bronze Age would simply be mystified by if they were able to visit our households. Now, of course, specialization is wonderful, but there are also difficulties associated with specialization. Having everyone do what it is that they do best still requires everybody to get along and coordinate in some fashion. Still requires us to make sure that no matter how good people are at pottery, that we still have people who are providing us with food. And so we want to try to understand what the different kinds of frictions are economically that might impede specialization. We know that specialization creates value, but there are costs associated with specialization as well. And so the trade-off between the gains of specialization and the costs often determines how specialized a particular economy becomes. And that means that reducing the frictions to specialization can lead to greater degrees of specialization, and hopefully, as a result of that, more surplus, which we can use for financing the society that we all enjoy. So let's take a quick walk through the kinds of things that specialists need in order to pursue what it is that they do best. First thing specialists require is investment. They have to gain their specialized knowledge somehow by investing in specialized education. Sometimes specialists require specific kinds of equipment. For example, a metallurgist who does not have a forge is not particularly practical, unless, of course, they can build one. In this area, we also consider retraining, because not everybody's skills are necessarily suited to what kinds of specialists we will require until the end of their days. And so retraining is very important for us to consider in our society. It is effectively the cost of adjusting the composition of capital. When we moved away from buggy whip and carriage manufacturers to car manufacturing, there were significant costs associated with changing what our specialists were doing. In the same way, as we move into the 21st century, a number of jobs from the 20th century are going to become obsolete, and we are necessarily going to have to invest in retraining our people if we hope to make best use of their human capital. Next, specialists require information. What should you specialize in? You might be really, really good at making card castles, but if nobody's willing to trade you, say, food and shelter for your card castle, then it's fairly irrelevant. So specialists have to understand what it is that they can do that is valuable for others. In fact, some specialists may have more than one area where they can create value, and what they need is to have the knowledge, or at least the information, of which of these specialized skills will be most valued by the people that they may be trading with. A lack of information, compounded with risk aversion, which individuals are shown to display on a regular basis, often limits investment, which of course means that there are fewer opportunities for scale and coordination, which means less surplus. Finally, specialists require counterparties to exchange their output with. If I'm a chicken farmer and you're a cow farmer and I want beef, well, I'd better hope that there's a beef farmer somewhere, and I have to find out who you are, where you are, and negotiate with you. And there are very high costs associated to locating and negotiating with these kinds of counterparties. And that's what we're going to be talking about next, which is specialists markets, or how various specialists meet up with one another and coordinate the exchange of their specialized production such that we are all made better off, as opposed to simply having a few people who are specialized in pottery or pin making or poetry, which may not necessarily be required for our survival.